The Galactic Council had declared Earth's cuisine primitive, barely fit for livestock. Across 9 star systems, human chefs were banned from interstellar kitchens, their recipes dismissed as crude fuel for a dying species. But when the Empress of Velthara arrived unannounced at the orbital station, her daughter starving and her patience gone, she demanded one final proof before signing humanity's permanent exile into culinary darkness. And the only human left in the kitchen was Marcus Chen, a widowed father who'd learned to cook not from masters, but from bedtime stories and a daughter's smile. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The orbital station hung like a silver coin against the void, rotating slow enough to trick the body into believing in gravity. Its kitchen stretched across 3 levels, chrome and crystal towers where alien chefs commanded flames that burned in colors Earth had never named. Steam rose in curtains of lavender and gold. The air tasted of spices harvested from dying stars. Marcus Chen worked in the lowest kitchen, the one reserved for scrubbing. His white jacket, once crisp, now carried the stains of 100 dismissed dishes. He knelt beside the industrial sink, elbow deep in grease and disappointment, while 3 levels above him, the Kyrosian head chef orchestrated a symphony of contempt. Through the walls, Marcus could hear the hiss and click of alien tongues, the laughter that needed no translation. His daughter Lily pressed her face against the viewing port that separated the service corridor from the kitchen. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a smile that could shame the station's artificial sun. She waved, and Marcus waved back with a soapy hand, careful not to let her see the way his jaw tightened when the laughter grew louder. The head chef, Vorath of the Kairos ascendancy, swept past Marcus without looking down. His scales shimmered like oil on water, refracting light into rainbows that seemed designed to mock humility. He barked orders in 3 languages simultaneously, his secondary mouth translating insults into universal standard. Human filth, he called the residue on the pans. Human waste, he called the ingredients Marcus had tried to requisition last month. Marcus did not argue. He scrubbed until the chrome sang, until his reflection stared back at him clear and tired. He had learned, in the 2 years since the culinary exile decree, that silence kept him employed. Employment kept Lily fed, and feeding Lily was the only star he navigated by now. The station's alarm chimed once, a deep crystalline note that made the water in Marcus's sink shiver. Viewports across the kitchen wall flickered to life, displaying the approach vector of a ship that did not ask for permission to dock. Its hull was black as a held breath, etched with silver glyphs that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Vorath's scales flattened against his body. The other chefs froze mid-chop, mid-stir, mid-breath. Even the flames hesitated. Through the viewing port, Lily's eyes went wide. The Empress of Velthara had arrived unannounced, and she was hungry. The docking clamps sang like broken bells as the Veltharan ship locked into place. Marcus rose from the sink, water dripping from his forearms, and watched through the viewport as the procession entered. The Empress moved like winter given form, tall and glacial, her skin the pale blue of oxygen-starved lips. Her robes flowed without wind, woven from something that drank light and gave back only whispers. But it was the child in her arms that silenced the kitchen. Small, frail, her skin flickering between transparency and solidity like a guttering candle. The daughter, Sarah, hung limp against her mother's chest, her breathing shallow enough to count the pauses between. Vorath stepped forward, his scales brightening into a display of diplomatic radiance. "Your Imperial Majesty," he began, his voice honeyed with the kind of respect that costs nothing. "We are honored beyond measure. Our finest suite awaits, our master chefs prepared to craft." The Empress raised one hand. The gesture was small. The silence it commanded was absolute. "My daughter is dying," she said. Her voice carried the weight of glaciers calving into dark seas. "She has not eaten in 9 days. Your master chefs have tried. 17 stations, 43 dishes, all prepared with the finest molecular precision your alliance can offer. She turned her gaze across the kitchen, and when it fell upon Marcus, still standing beside the sink with soap on his hands, something flickered in her expression. Not recognition, calculation. All of them failed, she continued, because Veltheran children do not digest food. They digest intention. They require nourishment prepared, with purpose, with presence, with something your replicators and your perfectly calibrated ovens cannot synthesize. Vorath's scales dimmed slightly. Your Majesty, surely I have come here as a final courtesy, the Empress interrupted. Before I return to my council and recommend that humanity's culinary exile be made permanent across all systems. Before I sign the decree that will reduce your species to gray rations and recycled paste for the remainder of your existence in space. She looked at Marcus again. You, she said. Human. What is your function? Marcus swallowed. The weight of every gaze in the kitchen pressed against his spine. I clean, Your Majesty, he said. I scrub the pans. The Empress tilted her head. Can you cook? She asked. Vorath stepped between them. Your Majesty, this human is not certified, not trained. In the Empress's hand moved again, and Vorath's voice died in his throat. I did not ask for his credentials, she said softly. I asked if he can cook. She lowered, her gaze to Sarah, whose breathing had grown more labored. My daughter has perhaps 2 days before her body consumes itself. I am not interested in certifications. I am interested in miracles. Marcus looked through the viewport. Lily stared back, her small hand pressed flat against the glass. He thought of the mornings he woke at 4 to prepare her breakfast before school. The evenings he taught her to crack eggs, to measure flour, to taste as she went. I can cook, Your Majesty, Marcus said. Then you have one chance, the Empress replied. Feed my daughter. If she eats, humanity's exile will be reconsidered. If she does not, you will have given her a gentle death. That is more than I can ask of empires. The auxiliary pantry sat at the station's edge, where the artificial gravity thinned and footsteps felt lighter, as if the body were already preparing to float away. Marcus descended the service stairs alone, his hands still trembling from the Empress's words. Behind him, Vorath had protested in 7 languages, but the Empress's silence had been louder than all of them. She had given Marcus 2 hours. 2 hours to save a child, to redeem a species, to cook a miracle. The pantry door opened with a hiss that sounded like a held breath released. Inside, the air smelled of neglect and cardboard, of things abandoned when they stopped being useful. Shelves stretched into shadows, stacked with ingredients that had once belonged to human chefs before the exile. Most had been reassigned, sent back to Earth, or scattered to colonies that still allowed them to cook for their own kind. What remained was the debris of a culture told it had nothing worth savoring. Marcus moved through the aisles, his fingers trailing across labels written in languages that felt like home. Arborio rice in torn bags, saffron threads in cracked vials, a single tin of anchovies, rusted at the seams. He searched with the methodical patience of a man who had learned to find dinner in empty cupboards, who had stretched meals across weeks when the station's human rations ran short. In the back corner, behind a crate of protein powder that had expired 3 years ago, he found it. A preservation unit, small and humming, its power cells still green. Inside, vacuum-sealed and labeled in his wife's handwriting, were the ingredients she had set aside before she got sick, before the treatments failed, before she had pulled him close and whispered the recipes she wanted Lily to grow up tasting. Marcus lifted the packets, with hands that knew reverence. Chicken thighs, pale and cold, wrapped in butcher paper. Pearl onions, each one perfect and small as a child's marble. Fresh thyme bundled with kitchen twine. Garlic cloves still wearing their papery skins. And at the bottom, a bottle of red wine, Burgundy. The label faded, but the seal intact. Coq au vin, his wife's signature dish. The one she made on birthdays and bad days, and days when the world needed to be reminded that patience could transform anything. "This is not fast food," she had said. "This is the kind of meal that asks you to stay present, to watch, to care." Marcus gathered the ingredients and climbed back toward the kitchen. Through the viewing port, Lily still waited. She saw what he carried and her eyes brightened with recognition. She mouthed the words "Mama's recipe," and Marcus nodded. When he entered the main kitchen, the alien chefs had formed a gallery along the walls. Vorath stood closest to the range. The Empress sat in a chair that had been brought for her, Sarah cradled in her lap. The child's breathing came in shallow sips now, each one smaller than the last. Marcus set the ingredients on the workstation. He unwrapped the chicken, arranged the onions, uncorked the wine. The scent rose like a memory given shape. He tied on his apron and began. The stove was older than most of the station's equipment, a relic from when humans still cooked here daily before the culinary exile turned their kitchens into museums of irrelevance. Marcus lit the burner with a striker that sparked twice before catching. The flame bloomed blue and steady, a small sun that asked only to be fed and watched. He reached for the cast-iron skillet hanging above the workstation, heavy enough to anchor a ship. The weight of it in his hand felt like coming home. He set it over the flame and added oil, watching it shimmer and thin as it heated. The alien chefs leaned closer despite themselves, scales and feathers, and chitin catching the light. They had cooked with plasma torches and molecular destabilizers, but there was something in the simplicity of fire and iron that made them pause. Marcus patted the chicken thighs dry with a cloth, the way his wife had taught him. "Moisture is the enemy of a good sear," she had said. "You want the skin to sing, not steam." He seasoned each piece with salt and pepper, his fingers remembering the muscle memory of 1,000 meals prepared in quiet kitchens, while Lily slept upstairs. When the oil began to whisper against the pan's surface, he laid the chicken skin side down. The sizzle rose like applause. The skin crackled and tightened, browning in a pattern that looked like continents forming on a new world. Fat rendered into the oil, turning it golden. The scent bloomed outward, rich and savory, carrying notes of pepper and heat, and something indefinable that made even Vorath's nostrils flare. A Kyrosian sous chef sneered from his position along the wall. "Primitive Maillard reaction," he announced. "Simple protein degradation. Any apprentice could achieve this with a temperature probe and a timer." Marcus did not respond. He watched the chicken the way a parent watches a sleeping child, attentive without smothering. He knew the exact moment to flip each piece, not by counting seconds but by listening to the change in pitch as the moisture left and the crust formed. He turned them with tongs that moved like extensions of his fingers, revealing skin, the color of autumn leaves. While the chicken browned on its second side, Marcus reached for the pearl onions. He had peeled them earlier, each one a small exercise in patience. He added them to the pan around the chicken, where they rolled and settled like pale moons orbiting bronze planets. Butter followed, a generous knob that melted and foamed, coating everything in liquid gold. The kitchen had grown quieter. Through the viewing port, Lily stood on her toes, her breath fogging the glass. Marcus caught her eye and winked. The same wink he gave her every morning when he packed her lunch. The one that said everything would be okay even when he wasn't sure it would. He lifted the chicken from the pan and set it aside, then reached for the wine. The bottle opened with a cork's whisper. He poured it into the hot pan, and the liquid hit with a sound like rain on summer pavement. Steam exploded upward, carrying the alcohol into vapor, leaving behind the concentrated essence of fruit, wood. That was when Vorath made his move. With a gesture so slight it might have been accident, he adjusted the flow regulator on Marcus's burner. The flame guttered and dropped to barely a pilot light. Marcus saw it happen. Their eyes met across the kitchen. Vorath smiled with both mouths. The reduction that should have taken 12 minutes would now take 40. And Sarah's breathing had grown shallower still. Marcus stared at the weakened flame, then at the wine barely moving in the pan. Around him, the alien chefs shifted with the anticipation of collapse. Vorath's scales shimmered with satisfaction. The Empress remained still, but her arms tightened around Sarah, whose skin had gone nearly transparent. Minutes mattered now. Minutes Marcus no longer had. He looked through the viewport at Lily. She pressed both palms against the glass, her face creased with worry. And in that moment, Marcus heard his wife's voice. Not as memory, but as presence. "Temperature is just energy," she had said. "And energy comes in more forms than heat." Marcus pulled the skillet from the dying burner and carried it to the prep station. He reached for a copper bowl hanging above, one used for whipping cream by hand. He nested the skillet inside the bowl, then filled the space between them with hot water from the sink, creating a makeshift bain-marie. The alien chefs murmured in confusion. Vorath's smile thinned. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "You cannot reduce wine in a water bath. The temperature is insufficient." Marcus began to stir the wine with a wooden spoon, slow circles that kept the liquid moving. He stirred with the same rhythm he used when he rocked Lily to sleep as a baby, when he walked her through nightmares. He began to speak, not to the Empress or the chefs, but to Lily through the glass. "Do you remember when Mama made this dish?" he said softly. "It was your 4th birthday. She started cooking at dawn. She said the onions had to caramelize slow, had to turn sweet instead of bitter. She said you couldn't rush the wine, you had to coax it." The wine in the pan began to shift. Not boiling, not simmering, but moving with gentle insistence. Steam rose in wisps. The scent deepened, concentrated not through violence but through patience. The alcohol burned away in invisible threads, leaving behind layers of flavor that built like sediment becoming stone. Marcus added the chicken back to the pan, nestling each piece into the wine. He spooned the liquid over the meat, basting it with the rhythm of a lullaby. "She told you cooking was like a conversation," he said to Lily. "You had to listen to what the food was saying." The Empress leaned forward slightly. Her fingers traced patterns on Syrah's back, the same soothing circles Marcus drew with his spoon. Around the kitchen, the mockery had drained from the alien faces. A Veltharan medical attendant approached. "Your Majesty, the child's vital signs are declining. We should return to the ship." "Not yet," the Empress whispered. Her eyes remained fixed on Marcus's hands. Marcus added time. The fresh sprigs Lily had grown in their quarters from seeds his wife had saved. The scent bloomed through the kitchen, green and honest. He added garlic, letting it soften in the wine's warmth. The pearl onions had turned golden, translucent, sweet, as promises kept. He lifted one with his spoon and held it up to the light. Through the viewport, Lily smiled. "Just like Mama's," she mouthed. The reduction was nearly complete. The wine had transformed into something born from the marriage of patience and purpose. It coated the back of Marcus's spoon in a glossy veil. Vorath stared at the pan, his scales flat. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "The mathematics do not support this outcome." Marcus met his gaze. "Mathematics never taught me how to cook," he said. "My daughter did." A figure emerged from the shadows behind the Empress's retinue. Dr. Zal then, Velthara's chief nutritional scientist, moved with the precision of someone who had spent lifetimes measuring molecules. His skin glowed with bioluminescent markers that pulsed in rhythms corresponding to his thoughts. He carried a scanner that hummed with sensors designed to break food down to its elemental truth. He approached Marcus's workstation, his luminescence shifting to the cold blue of skepticism. "Explain your process, human," he said. "You claim to nourish through intention, yet intention is not measurable. It does not appear in molecular chains." Marcus continued stirring, his spoon drawing circles through the wine. "The pearl onions take 40 minutes to caramelize properly," he said quietly. "Not 39, not 41, 40. But only if you are present with them, if you watch them turn from bitter to sweet." Zal then scanner passed over the pan, its readout flickering with data streams. "I detect standard chemical processes," he announced. "Sugars breaking down under heat, proteins denaturing. There is nothing here that requires consciousness. Marcus lifted one of the pearl onions with his spoon and held it to the light. It glowed, translucent as amber, golden at its heart. When my wife was sick, he said, she could not eat most foods. Her treatments made everything taste like metal, but she could eat these. He rotated the onions slowly, because I made them the way she taught me, not as fuel, as conversation. Metaphor does not constitute methodology, Zal then said. It is not metaphor, Marcus replied. When you cook for someone you love, you think about them with every motion. You remember how they smile when they taste something good. You imagine them at the table. That thought, that attention, it changes how you move your hands, how long you wait, when you decide something is done. Zal then stepped closer, his scanner probing deeper. And you believe this immeasurable quality transfers to the food itself? Marcus met his gaze. I believe my daughter knows the difference between food I made while thinking about her and food I made while thinking about nothing. I believe she tastes love the same way you taste salt. The Empress shifted in her chair. Sarah stirred slightly against her chest, the first movement she had made in an hour. The child's nostrils flared, catching the scent of thyme and wine, and patience made edible. Zal then's scanner emitted a tone it had never made before, a harmonic suggesting confusion rather than conclusion. He studied the readout, his bioluminescence cycling through colors that had no name in human spectrum. There is something, he admitted slowly, a pattern in the molecular arrangement. Not random, not chaotic, organized in ways our replicators do not achieve. Marcus added one final sprig of thyme. That is because your replicators do not know how to wait, he said. They do not know how to hope. He turned off the heat beneath the bain-marie. The dish was complete. The wine had reduced to a glaze that clung to the chicken like a second skin. Dark and glossy, smelling of earth and thyme and the particular grace that comes from feeding the people who matter most. Zal then stepped back, his scanner still humming with confused data. Prove it, he said quietly. Let the child taste. Sarah's breathing had become something barely there, a whisper of air that might stop at any moment, and no one would notice until the silence had already settled. Her skin flickered like a failing light, transparent enough now to see the delicate architecture of veins beneath. The Empress held her daughter with the careful tension of someone cradling the last unbroken thing in a shattered world. The Veltheron guard, a warrior whose armor bore the scars of 17 campaigns, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of duty overriding hope. Your Majesty, we must return to the ship. The stasis chamber can preserve her until we reach the medical stations at Velth Prime. If we wait longer. No, the Empress said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Her eyes remained fixed on Marcus as he lifted the pan from the water bath. Not yet. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for a plate. It was simple, porcelain, white and unadorned, the kind used for station meals that no one remembered. He had no crystal platters, no presentation towers, none of the architectural flourishes the alien chefs used to turn food into theater. He had only the plate and the meal, and the 10 minutes Sarah might have left. He arranged the chicken with care, each piece placed with the attention his wife had taught him. One thigh in the center, the pearl onions scattered around it like satellites. The wine reduction spooned over everything in a glaze that caught the kitchen's light. He took the sprig of thyme Lily had grown and laid it across the top, a small green promise. Through the viewport, Lily pressed so close to the glass her breath made halos of fog. Her lips moved in silent prayer, the kind children offer to a universe that has not yet taught them about odds. Marcus lifted the plate with both hands and crossed the kitchen in steps that felt like crossing a canyon on a bridge made of hope and butter. I asked for 10 more minutes, he said to the Empress. I am asking for them now. The Empress looked at the plate, then at Marcus, then at her daughter whose eyes had not opened in 2 days. She shifted Sarah in her arms, adjusting the child's position with the practiced grace of motherhood that transcends species. She took the fork Marcus offered, its metal worn smooth by years of use. The kitchen held its breath. Even Vorath's contempt had drained into something closer to attention. The ventilation systems seemed to quiet. The station's rotation felt slower, as if time itself were leaning in to watch. The Empress cut a small piece of chicken, gathering some of the wine reduction and a sliver of pearl onion. She brought it to Sarah's lips, which were pale as winter sky. The child did not respond. The Empress tried again, the fork barely touching her daughter's mouth, the scent of time and patience drifting between them. Sarah's nostrils flared. Once, twice. Her eyes fluttered beneath closed lids. And then, so slowly it might have been imagined, her lips parted. The Empress slipped the fork inside. The kitchen watched a child taste something that might be her last meal, or her first real one. Sarah's throat moved. She swallowed, her eyes opened. And in them, for the first time in 9 days, there was hunger. Silence fell across the kitchen like snow on a battlefield. Sarah's eyes, open now and focusing, carried a clarity that had been absent since the Empress first boarded the ship 9 stations ago. Her skin, which had flickered between existence and absence, began to stabilize. The transparency faded degree by degree, replaced by the pale blue solidity of Veltheran youth. The child's hand, small and trembling, reached for the fork in her mother's grasp. "More," she whispered. Her voice was thin as spun glass, but it carried across the kitchen with the force of a proclamation. "Please, Mama. More." The Empress's composure, maintained through 17 stations and 43 failed meals, fractured. A single tear traced down her face, freezing into a small crystal before it reached her chin. She cut another piece, this time including more of the pearl onion, more of the wine reduction that had been coaxed into existence through patience rather than heat. Sarah ate, not with the desperation of starvation, but with the slow deliberation of someone tasting something they wanted to remember. She chewed carefully, her eyes closing as flavors registered in ways the molecular meals had never managed. Her small fingers touched her mother's hand, squeezing once. Dr. Zal then approached with his scanner, his bioluminescence shifting through colors that suggested wonder rather than skepticism. He passed the device over Sarah, and its readout painted patterns in the air. The child's metabolic markers were rising. Cellular regeneration had begun. Her body, which had been consuming itself for 9 days, had found something it recognized as nourishment. "This is impossible," Zal then breathed. "The molecular structures are the same, yet her body accepts this and rejected all others." The Empress looked at Marcus. "What did you do differently?" she asked. "What ingredient did you add that our chefs could not measure?" Marcus glanced through the viewport at Lily, who had both hands pressed to the glass. "I cooked it the way my wife taught me," he said quietly. "Every motion, I was thinking about someone I love, about feeding them, about watching them smile. I was not trying to nourish a body. I was trying to nourish a child." Sarah took another bite, and then another. Color bloomed in her cheeks. She looked at Marcus. "It tastes like my mother feels," she said, "when she holds me before sleep." The Empress lifted her daughter close, burying her face in the child's hair. Around the kitchen, the alien chefs stood frozen. Vorath's scales had gone flat and gray. His secondary mouth hung open, wordless. Through the viewport, Lily was laughing and crying at once. Marcus smiled at her, tired and whole. Dr. Zal then studied his scanner, then looked at the Empress. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "I believe we have been approaching nourishment incorrectly. We have been feeding bodies. The human feeds souls." The Empress rose, still holding Sarah. She crossed to Marcus and stopped before him. The kitchen waited. "The human culinary exile is revoked," she said, "effective immediately. Humanity's understanding of intentional nourishment will be studied, honored, and taught across all systems." The Empress's words rippled through the station's communication grid like stones dropped into still water. In council chambers across 9 systems, diplomats paused mid-argument. On trade stations where human chefs had been scrubbing floors for 2 years, heads lifted. The decree scrolled across view screens in 17 languages, each translation carrying the same impossible message. Humanity was no longer exiled from the stars' kitchens. Vorath stepped forward, his scales flaring in a last desperate attempt at authority. Your Majesty, surely this requires council approval. One meal cannot overturn 2 years of precedent. The human got lucky. Nothing more. The Empress turned to face him, and the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop. Sarah still held in her arms, color returning to the child's face with each passing moment. Luck, she said softly, does not teach a body how to digest what 17 stations worth of master chefs could not provide. Luck does not encode intention into molecular structures. She gestured to Dr. Zhao then. Show them. The scientist projected his scanner's readout into the air above the kitchen. Holographic data bloomed like strange flowers, showing the coq au vin's composition alongside the 43 failed dishes that had come before. To the untrained eye, they appeared identical. Same proteins, same fats, same chemical bonds. But Zhao then highlighted a pattern, a subtle organization in how the molecules arranged themselves. Here, he said, pointing to Marcus's dish. The structure forms patterns we have only seen in naturally occurring systems. In growth, in healing, in living tissue organizing itself with purpose. He shifted to the other dishes. These show random distribution. Efficient, yes. Nutritious by measurement, yes. But dead, assembled, rather than grown. He looked at Marcus with something approaching reverence. The human did not simply combine ingredients. He created something that remembers being cared for. And Veltharan children, who require intention to digest, can sense that memory. Marcus stood quietly, his apron still stained with wine and butter. He thought of his wife in their kitchen on Earth, teaching him to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, to taste as he went, to cook as an act of love rather than necessity. She had known something the galaxy's greatest chefs had forgotten, that food was not fuel, it was language. The Empress handed Sarah to her attendant, the child now alert and asking for water. She approached Marcus and did something that made every alien in the kitchen stiffen. She knelt. The gesture was small. The meaning was absolute. A sovereign bowing to a dishwasher. Teach us, she said. Not your recipes, your philosophy. Show us how to cook with intention, how to feed souls instead of bodies. Marcus helped her stand, uncomfortable with the attention. Your Majesty, I'm just a father trying to feed his daughter. Exactly, the Empress replied. And that is the ingredient we lost. She turned to address the assembled chefs, her voice carrying the weight of imperial decree. Effective immediately, every culinary academy in the Veltharan Empire will include human instructors. We will learn patience. We will learn presence. We will remember that the greatest cuisine is not the most efficient. It is the most loved. Vorath's scales had gone completely gray. Around him, the other chefs began to nod, slowly at first, then with growing conviction. They had witnessed something that could not be denied. 6 months passed, like seasons on a world that had forgotten how to measure time in anything but efficiency. The orbital station transformed in ways both visible and subtle. Human chefs returned from exile, moving through kitchens where they had once only been allowed to scrub. They came hesitant at first, then with growing confidence, carrying recipes written in their grandmother's handwriting and spices that smelled like home. Marcus remained in his kitchen, the same one where he had knelt beside industrial sinks. But now apprentices gathered around his workstation, watching him brown chicken with the patience of a man who understood that good food could not be rushed. Kirosians, Vayari, Threxians, even Vorath, whose scales had never quite regained their former shimmer, stood shoulder to shoulder, learning to caramelize onions until they turned sweet. The lesson was always the same. Cook for someone, Marcus would say. Not for fuel, not for efficiency, for a person. Remember their face while you work. Imagine them tasting what you make. Let that thought guide your hands. Lily attended the classes when her school schedule allowed, sitting on a stool beside the viewport that had once separated her from her father. Now she sat inside, helping measure flour, teaching alien children how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. She had become a bridge between species, small and human, and unafraid. The Empress established the Academy of Intentional Nourishment on Velthara's capital moon, a place where cooking was taught not as chemistry, but as meditation, as devotion. Students learned to recognize the difference between food assembled and food grown with care. They studied the philosophy of patience, the architecture of attention, the way love could be tasted if the cook knew how to season with it. Sira visited the station often, always seeking out Marcus's kitchen. She had grown stronger, her skin solid and bright, her laughter carrying through corridors that had once echoed only with efficiency. She called Marcus uncle, and he taught her to make coq au vin the way his wife had taught him, emphasizing that the pearl onions required 40 minutes and presence. Dr. Exile then published papers that changed how the galaxy understood nourishment. His research showed that Veltharan children were not unique in sensing intention. All species, to varying degrees, responded to food prepared with care differently than food merely assembled. The science validated what grandmothers across 1,000 worlds had always known. Vorath remained at the station, no longer head chef but student. He learned slowly, his arrogance replaced by something closer to humility. One evening, he presented Marcus with a dish he had made, chicken, prepared with wine and pearl onions. He had thought of his own daughter while cooking, a child he had not seen in 3 years because duty had seemed more important than presence. Marcus tasted it and nodded. "It is good," he said. "She will taste that you remembered her." In the viewport's reflection, the stars turned in their ancient patterns. The station rotated. Somewhere below, Lily helped an alien child measure time while explaining that her mother had taught her father everything important. And in kitchens across 9 systems, chefs learned that the most revolutionary act in a universe built on efficiency was simply to cook with love and call it dinner.